Daily Words of God. When God comes to the earth, He does only His work within divinity, which is what the heavenly Spirit has entrusted to the incarnate God. When He comes, He but speaks across the land, to give voice to His utterances by different means and from different perspectives. He chiefly takes supplying man and teaching man as His goals and working principle, and does not concern Himself with such things as interpersonal relationships or the details of people's lives. His main ministry is to speak for the Spirit. That is, when God's Spirit appears tangibly in the flesh, He only provides for man's life and releases the truth. He does not involve Himself in man's work, which is to say, He does not partake in the work of humanity. Humans cannot do divine work, and God does not partake in human work. In all the years since God came to this earth to perform His work, He has always done it through people. These people, however, cannot be considered God incarnate, only those who are used by God. The God of today, meanwhile, can speak directly from the perspective of divinity, sending forth the Spirit's voice and working on behalf of the Spirit. All those whom God has used throughout the ages are, likewise, instances of God's Spirit working within a fleshly body. So why can't they be called God? But today's God is also God's Spirit working directly in the flesh. And Jesus, too, was God's Spirit working in the flesh. Both of them are called God. So what's the difference? The people that God has used throughout the ages have all been capable of normal thought and reason. They have all understood the principles of human conduct. They have had normal human ideas and have been possessed of all the things that normal people should possess. Most of them have had exceptional talent and innate intelligence. In working upon these people, God's Spirit harnesses their talents, which are their God-given gifts. God's Spirit brings their talents into play, using their strengths in God's service. Yet the essence of God is without ideas or thought, unadulterated with human intentions, and even lacks what normal humans possess, which is to say, He is not even conversant with the principles of human conduct. This is how it is when today's God comes to the earth. His work and His words are unadulterated with human intentions or human thought, but they are a direct manifestation of the intentions of the Spirit, and He works directly on God's behalf. This means that the Spirit directly speaks, that is, the divinity directly does the work, without mixing in even one bit of man's intentions. In other words, the incarnate God embodies divinity directly, is without human thought or ideas, and has no understanding of the principles of human conduct. If only divinity were at work, there would be no way for God's work to be carried out on earth. So when God comes to earth, He must have a small number of people He uses to work within humanity, in conjunction with the work that God does in divinity. In other words, He uses human work to uphold His divine work. If not, there would be no way for man to directly engage with the divine work. This is how it was with Jesus and His disciples. During His time in the world, Jesus abolished the old laws and established new commandments. He also spoke many words. All this work was done in divinity. The others, such as Peter, Paul, and John, all rested their subsequent work on the foundation of Jesus' words. Which is to say, God launched his work in that age, ushering in the beginning of the age of grace. That is, he ushered in a new era, abolishing the old and also fulfilling the words, God is the beginning and the end. In other words, man must perform human work upon the foundation of divine work. Once Jesus had said all he needed to say and finished his work on earth, he left man. After this, all people, in working, did so according to the principles expressed in his words, and practiced according to the truths of which he spoke. All of these people worked for Jesus. If it had been Jesus alone doing the work, no matter how many words he spoke, people would have had no means of engaging with his words, because he was working in divinity and could only speak words of divinity. And he could not have explained things to the point where normal people could understand his words. And so he had to have the apostles and prophets who came after him supplement his work. This is the principle of how God incarnate does his work, using the incarnate flesh to speak and to work, so as to complete the work of divinity, and then using a few, or perhaps more, people after God's own heart to supplement his work. That is, God uses people after his heart to do the work of shepherding and watering in humanity, so that God's chosen people may enter the reality of the truth. If, when he came to the flesh, God only did the work of divinity, and there were no people after his heart to work in concert with him, then man would be incapable of understanding God's will or engaging with God. God must use normal people who are after his heart to complete this work, to watch over and shepherd the churches, so that the level that man's cognitive processes, his brain, are capable of imagining can be achieved. In other words, God uses a small number of people who are after his heart to translate the work that he does within his divinity, so that it can be opened up, to transform divine language into human language, so that people can comprehend and understand it. If God did not do so, no one would understand God's divine language, because the people after God's heart are, after all, a small minority, and man's ability to comprehend is weak. That is why God chooses this method only when working in the incarnate flesh. If there were only divine work, there would be no way for man to know or engage with God, because man does not understand God's language. Man is able to understand this language only through the agency of the people after God's heart, who clarify his words. However, if there were only such people working within humanity, that could only maintain man's normal life. It could not transform man's disposition. God's work could not have a new starting point. There would only be the same old songs, the same old platitudes. Only through the agency of the incarnate God, who says all that needs to be said and does all that needs to be done during the period of his incarnation, after which people work and experience according to His words. Only thus will their life disposition be able to change, and only thus will they be able to flow with the times. He who works within divinity represents God, while those who work within humanity are people used by God. Which is to say, the incarnate God is essentially different from the people used by God. The incarnate God is able to do the work of divinity, whereas the people used by God are not. At the beginning of each age, God's Spirit speaks personally and launches the new era to bring man into a new beginning. When He has finished speaking, this signifies that God's work within His divinity is done. Thereafter, people all follow the lead of those used by God to enter into their life experience. By the same token, this is also the stage in which God brings man into the new age and gives people a new starting point, at which time God's work in the flesh concludes.